All right, so we're live. At this point, we're going to go over Flex, and hopefully we can get in at least a nice intro for the last hour of today, and we can go more deep into it tomorrow. But I'm also going to give Todd free range to interrupt me whenever he wants, because he's a Flexpert, and this is the first time I've ever taught it live. So the main thing with Flex is that the whole reason they came up with it is, as you've seen, throughout this week, and what I've been trying to drill in, especially to some of our newer beginners, is really once we conquer understanding block versus inline and inline block and positioning and the box model and then floats and clears, that you're pretty much home free on CSS and HTML. The rest is just adding on to that. You just want to get the nice fundamentals, and you want to add on to that. So, and it's all about layout, right? Like everything we've done is all, the complexities have all been about a layout. It's easy for you to understand, like font size 14 pixels, what that means versus 16 pixels. But the confusing stuff is when we start getting into layout, how we push list items to the left, how we push them to the right, all that stuff, right? So that's kind of and especially in the past, some of the, that's always been the troubles of learning HTML and CSS. How do we make the site look the way we want it? So Flex is newer to HTML5, and it's a way, what they're trying to do with Flex is create a more efficient way to create your layouts, right, with your HTML and CSS. So we're going to kind of go through this. And like the main idea, and you can read this basically, the main idea is that with Flex Layout, you want to give whatever the container is of the child elements the ability to alter the item's height, width, to change as the screen size change. So it's a more fluid layout, right? And we've done this a little bit on our own, not through Flex, but you've noticed like there's a difference when we give something a height or width of a certain pixels versus we give it a relative height and width of percentages, right? So we give it like a relative height and width of like 33%. It's going to say 33% to the parent container, right? And Flex is a way to be even more flexible than just the relative heights and widths that we've been using so far. All right. So I'm going to go over the main terms right now with Flex, and then we'll get into the specific. We'll go through some case or some specific cases. That way you can understand it better. All right, and then hopefully today we'll be able to we'll build a nav bar or a header like we've been doing with Flex, and we'll get through that today. So first off, anytime you want to use Flex layout on some items, you give its container a display of Flex. So we've actually been using containers, so that's going to make sense to you, but you give its parent element the display of Flex, okay? That's nice and easy, straightforward. You're going to have that every time. Then we want to specify the Flex direction. The default is row, so it's just going to go left to right, right? You also have column, so you can stack the different elements, and these can be divs like we talked about, where it's really going to any block level elements, and it's really going to come in. It'll make more sense as we start styling out the gallery, the projects page that we just created, right? It's a good demonstration to see that on a grid. So we have row, we have column, which stacks them, and then you have row reverse and you have column reverse, which instead of going left to right, it would go right to left, and instead of going top to bottom, it would go bottom to top. Okay? Then you have Flex Wrap. By default, Flex tries to keep all the elements on the same line, right? So by default, it's got no wrap. You can see this here, single line, and then you have wrap, which is once it finishes, like say you have six, we'll say six divs. So say we're doing our projects page, right? And we have six different projects, 6 different of those articles we styled today, right? And we want each one to be like the width of 50% of the whole container of the screen, right? So it would wrap it down to 3 separate lines, right? 2 on each line. All right? And then you have, so it's default no wrap, then you have wrap. You have the wrap reverse, which is, it'll go the reverse of what's, of the way you have the way you have the direction. And then you have flex flow. This is the shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap. This is kind of like, we've seen shorthand properties before with background, right? So you can combine in background, you can do color, image, repeat, positioning all on one line. That's what flex flow is for both flex direction and flex wrap. And then you have justify content. So this is a nice little visual they give you. So if you have justify content, then it's going to, whatever the content, however you have it, the width, it's going to, try to keep it as far to the start. If you have flex start, it's going to push it all the way to the end. If you have flex end, if you have center, it's going to center it nice in between. If you have space between, it's going to push it out so that it covers the full line.
I think this really illustrates the power of flex with what Ryan is showing you right here. Like, just take a second, and do you have an extra mic there, Zoe, so this gets caught? Zoe still
I can come down there to you.
No, that's all right.
No extra mic.
No, okay, that's
Or I can just parrot you.
talk into your chest. We'll have our Top Gun moment. It's easier to talk actually down there. Now I feel like stage fright. This really illustrates the power of flex right here. So you're going to have a container like a div, and then that div might have 3 items in that. And so you can make those 3 items whatever you want them to be, right? Like we see on that site that we're building that's similar to Ryan Bonhardt's, did I say your last name right? Page. Where he has like, there's 3 screenshots, and then the next row, 3 screenshots. And then, if you try to make that mobile, right? So why don't you just bring up your page right there with your 3 screenshots, your projects. Yeah, right there, right there. So if you were to try to make that mobile, like if he scales that in, right, keep going, and then cool, it went to 2. And then it went to 1. Like, that's awesome. So no matter what size device you're looking at, that's coming and laying those out nicely. How did you do that right there?
I did that with responsive.
So you used media queries, and
Yeah.
you said at different breakpoints I'll display these differently. So if you go back,
So I gave it like 33 pixels, 33% at a full screen, and then once
Yeah.
I got to a medium screen, I gave it 50% and then full size. But it might be much easier with flex.
yeah. So if you go back to that one Flexbox page, right here, you can kind of see, okay, we got 3 things. How do we want them to lay out across the page? We could lay them out all to the left. We could lay them out all to the right. We could lay them out in the center. We could say, hey, we want the space in between, or we want the space around, right? And so that would be another way you could do it. And then it's flexible, so as you close the screen, it would automatically just sort of row wrap the items to the next row. And so even without media queries and breakpoints, as you change the dimensions of your viewport, of your window, whoever's looking at it, it would automatically just row wrap and drop those elements onto the next row. I think that showed up above. There's a little image where it was showing the row wrapping kind of, well, under row wrap right there, right? Where, okay, bring this one down to the next row. And if Ryan didn't have the media queries in there, right, then his page wouldn't have that responsiveness. So this is just another way to achieve the same thing, but it's a little bit easier.
Cool. I like it. All right, and now one thing about flex is with flex, it's the easiest way to do this. Actually, we'll just use this side. With flex, you always have the main axis, and then you have I think it's called the cross axis. So there's different properties, all right? So far, we've gone through flex direction, right? And so flex direction sets the direction of the main axis. Of the main axis. So in other words, if your flex direction is row or row reverse, your main axis. So we have flex direction. The main axis is going to be, left, that x-axis, right? If your flex direction is row, right? And if it's column, your main axis is going to be up and down. Okay? Does that make sense? Yep. So row is horizontal. Column is vertical. So that's going to be your main axis. So that's what flex direction determines, right? It sets your main axis and the direction in which it goes.
So here's a question. If you say, hey, I want this to be a row, and we know what a row is, your main axis is what? Row. And then what's your cross axis? Okay, and if you say, okay, I want this to be a flex direction column, what's your main axis? Column. And then what's your cross axis? Row. So depending upon whether you say this is going to be a column or a row of items, that changes what your main axis and your cross axis is. And then that in turn changes the I gotta look at the phrase, hold on.
It kind of determines where you're going to use justify content in a line item.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
determines which justify content and light items, which one does what.
So, yeah. So just like they said, for justify content, which is what we were just talking about a second ago, right? You have flex start. So if you justify content flex start and you have row, it's going to push it all the way to the left, right? It's going to keep it all to the way to the left. If you have justify content flex start and you have a column, it's going to push it all the way to the top, okay? So justify content is along your main axis. So I'm just putting in, just so we can have a little cheat sheet here, direction and justify content all pertain to your main axis, okay? This is simply the direction, and justify content is where, in the main axis the content is put, all right? So then next, we have align items. So align items affects everything on the cross axis. So by default, they're stretched, right? All right. Yeah. By default, they're stretched to cover the whole thing. So in other words, this is kind of like when we were using inline block the other day, right? So with inline block, it does a row, right? It's inline. And we had to do vertical align on the inline block, right? So with vertical align, it was inline block, the main axis, I'm using this, as a comparison, is left to right, so the cross axis would be up and down. So vertical align was kind of like how align items is, right? They're very similar. In other words, we can say center, and it would center them. The align items would be centered, and the vertical align would be centered. Or you can, if you do flex start, then they're all going to be, the vertical line's all going to be at the top there, right? Center. Flex in, the vertical align is going to be all at the bottom. And I'm saying vertical align assuming that the flex direction is a row or a row reverse, right? So you have align items, and then baseline. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but it just takes the baseline of the text you have in that element, right? So it aligns it all baseline. So like if you had text and it had more padding up top than this other text, it would still align it all along the baseline of the text, okay? Yeah, with baseline it aligns to the baseline of the text. All right, so we have align items, and that affects the cross axis. And I guess And then this is the aligned content is cross-axis as well. So, in other words, say we had, I took this. Did I write that up there for you guys? Aligned content? Yeah, I did. So say I took this, this Ryan Bonhardt right here, right? The projects page we just made, and I did flex on it, okay? And we did flex direction row, right? So it immediately, the main axis would be left to right, and then the cross axis would be up to down, or up and down, right? So, and I said justify content, the flex start, so it's up here in the left, all the way to the left, right? If I wanted to do flex in, since it was on the main axis, it would push it all the way, it would be like floating it all the way to the right, correct? Okay? And if I said center, it would center it right here, okay? Now, if I had, well, we don't have multiple items, so we won't go over align items. But if I had align content, right? So align content is just like justify content, but for the cross-axis, right? So if I had this article right here, and say it was inside, a div that was, say, all the way to the top height-wise. I just can't reach that high, so I drew that line up there. And then say the bottom, it was like, say it was like 600 pixels tall, right? And this article right here is only like 300 pixels tall, we'll say, okay? If we wanted it so that it would push all the way down to the bottom of it, then we would just say align content, and I'm pretty sure it's flex end on that. Yeah, flex end. And it would push this all the way down to the bottom, right? Because that's all the content. If we did center, it would put it in the middle. So it'd put it right here. So if we did center on justify content and center on align content, for right now, since we only had one item, then it'd sit right here in the middle of the page perfectly until we got another thing. Does that make sense? So flex can be really flexible on that. And just to be, I like, so let's just show you here this code pen. We can play around with it, and then we'll create a header. So right here, you have a question?
Let's say you choose flex direction low, right? And you created like 4 divs.
Yep.
Each div like it takes a picture. Do you still have to resize the pictures, or you don't have to do that?
Do you have to resize the pictures, or?
Yeah, like to put like width and height.
Yeah, so you're going to want to size. That way you can size it. There's different way you could size it through flex, which I'll show you later in the specific like item attributes over here on the right column. But just to keep it simple for now, like you could give each like image a width, a particular width, and then control the flow of it through flex, right? So basically here you have this flex container. So you have this flex container, right? So it's the width of the screen right here, and you have 6 list items, which are flex items, okay? So we understand all this. The flex container, the UL has a padding of 0, margin to 0, so it goes all the way to the edge, and it has a list style none, all right? And then this is just display flex with all the different presets to make it so that it works on older browsers. That's all what these lines are. WebKit box, Mozbox,
Those
and
are
those flags.
vendor prefixes. If you Google vendor prefixes, you can
WebKit is like a group of them.
So it's like from Safari to now
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that mean it's like the reset?
It's not a reset. No, it's just saying to the different browsers. I know I'm using experimental technique. Please allow me to use it.
It has the same, I guess, spirit as a reset in the sense that the reason why we use the reset is to make sure that we're starting from the same thing. But the opposite in that, it's just making whatever Flex in this case compatible with those browsers as well, so that it displays the same way across all the different browsers. Does that make sense? I think is in the way that you're asking, like the way to think about it, basically. But yeah. All right, so far we haven't gone over anything new. We've seen padding 0, margin 0, list style none, and display flex. All right, now we're going with flex flow, and remember flex flow is a shorthand for flex direction and flex wrap. So naturally, remember flex tries to keep everything on one line. So naturally it has no wrap, but we've given this particular container a wrap feature. So if these 6 items get too big, then they will move down to the next line. And then the justify content, remember, thanks to our cheat sheet, justify content is all about the main axis, I keep saying axis, and how they're laid out across the main axis, okay? So just another visual, space around. Okay. You can stop it.